Hello, welcome to Webinar Wednesday. We are going to get started in just a couple minutes. If you're just joining us, please take a second and answer our poll question. It's a fun one today. We are exploring potential locations for Cause Camp in 2023, and we would love your feedback. Also, go ahead and throw your name, your organization, maybe what town you're coming to us from in the chat so we can get to know you. Again, we'll get started in about 2 to 3 minutes. So go ahead and do those couple things and we'll get started. The city representing today. Wow, that's a good turnout from Kansas. Toronto, Canada, Chicago, Kenosha, Wisconsin. Who has the most snow? If you have 5 or more inches, throw it in the chat. I want to avoid your area. Nancy from West Michigan, welcome. Danielle from New Hampshire. The Education Partnership in Pennsylvania. El Salvador, Sylvia, welcome. Stephanie from Utah. Okay, again, go ahead and answer that poll question. We need to know what city you want to have Cause Camp in 2023. And we will get started in about 1 minute. Hillary from Wedgwood Christian Services, that's one of my favorite organizations. Welcome. Glad you could make it today. Francesca from Toronto. LaShonda from Missouri. We are all over the US today. Okay, I am Katie Appold. I'm the Executive Director of Do More Good and Nonprofit Hub, and I am so excited to be hosting this webinar today. This is a topic that I'm excited to learn about, and I think you guys are going to find fascinating. So we are joined by Grant Gooding and Katie Lord from Proof Positioning, and they are the masters of emotional data. And you're going to learn a lot more about what that means as they dig into how to craft messages that your donors will invest in. So Katie and Grant, I'm going to step off stage and let you go ahead and take it away.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. We're so excited to have you join us as a part of Webinar Wednesday with Nonprofit Hub. So I'm so excited to be part of Do More Good and work with Katie and her amazing team. So good morning. How to craft more messages your donors will invest in. I'm so excited to talk to you about this today, as I think it's going to be a great exercise in thinking about how the brain works and how we can tap more into our donors' interests and what our organizations do. So let me. So about me, my name is Katie Lord. I am a University of Kansas graduate, so Rock Chalk Jayhawk. Hopefully there are some other Jayhawks in the house. I am a nonprofit nerd, which is why I work for a data company, so that kind of makes sense. I have worked all over the country in organizations, so I've been both in nonprofits like you every day, and then I've also been on the consulting side for about 6 years now, and really love working alongside our client partners and helping to, again, raise more money and connect with people. And I love to talk books, which I'm sure we will be talking about some books, Grant, and dropping those into the chat of some great books that you can read or podcasts to listen to. But I've had the opportunity to, raise over $30 million and help people understand how we can connect to our donors on a more individual and personalized level, but doing it in a way that we can, repeat it and not take too much of our time. So Grant, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, hello, everyone. Yes, that is me. And I look like almost exactly like the darn picture now. I'm even wearing a blue shirt. Okay. I was an undergrad in music, which makes no sense. Although music sort of is creative mathematics. So a shout out to music folks and also nerd folks. I am give me a shout out in the chat if you're a nerd. I'm kind of an economics nerd. I abandoned law school in order to pursue mergers and acquisitions as far as from an analytics perspective, and helped develop a methodology that was essentially used as a due diligence tool. And we have taken that tool, which allows us to, in many ways, quantify emotional resonance, and we developed it just about 10 years ago now. And we help organizations understand the emotive drivers of their donors, their customers, depending on what kind of organization they are, and it works extremely well in the nonprofit space. I don't know if we all know this, but nonprofit is an extraordinarily emotional game. And so Katie caught wind of the work we were doing, and so she jumped on board. And so we have been trying to spearhead to the best of our ability and create awareness around how to measure and quantify emotions and how to use those to your advantages in order to create stronger connections with donors. It makes everyone's life easier. So the first thing I'm going to do, everyone get your chat box ready. So the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to do a little bit of an exercise. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys an idea, okay? And I want everyone to type in the first organization they think of. Now, these are going to be big brands, so it should be fairly easy. Now, and I want you to type those into the chat whenever I say them out loud. And I don't. Sometimes there's a little bit of a lag here. We'll do our best to manage. But so the first one I'm going to give you an easy one. All right. So if I say online search, what brand am I talking about? Okay, we have very little lag. It's fantastic. Now here's going to be the struggle when we don't get to do this in person, and I can't pick on you. It's a lot harder. Whenever I give you one of these, what I want you to do is I want you to even if your brain shifts, I want you to think of the very first thing that pops into your mind, even if you don't want to type it, even if you're embarrassed, I want you to type in the first thing that pops into your mind, right? So the first one, everybody gets Google, very good. You are all correct. Expensive coffee, who am I talking about? Well, it's funny, it doesn't seem that expensive anymore, right? But at the time, we were like, who the heck's paying, $6 for a cup of coffee, right? Exactly right. Everybody's doing 100% so far. Perfect. All right, greeting cards. The organization I'm talking about is, yes, of course. Yes, of course. Hallmark is who we're talking about. And what about Big Burrito? Who am I talking about? I love doing these nationally because there are a lot of times we get micro brands where but yes, sorry, I'm in Canada. Cadoba, right? So a lot of times we get some geography here, but for the most part, right, we're thinking of Chipotle. The idea of Big Burrito was sort of founded in their head. Next, low prices. Who am I talking about? Right, Walmart for the most part, except they're not. What a great pricing scheme. But that idea is stuck in our head, right? All right, what about online auction? course, we're talking about eBay, yes, and expensive watch.
Ooh.
Yes, for the most part, we're talking about Rolex. And online books, I'm talking about So what's interesting about this is like the correct answer is not Amazon, right? The correct answer is actually Kindle. But what's stuck in our head is kind of the point of this exercise. So soft drink, well, I just gave that away. Sorry, that was a double touch. You all were just going to say Coke anyway. All right, jeans. Who am I talking about? If I just say jeans, Kara, we found is our very clever Wrangler if you're old. Oh, it's interesting. There's no qualifier here, right? I didn't say like anything about the jean, right? There's no adjective, but Levi's, right? Affordable airline. Who am I talking about? This one's a little more over the board. None of them. That's correct.
Yeah, Stephanie is right.
So the interesting thing is, right, so the idea of affordable airline was generated by specifically the brand Southwest because they were the reason they could do it is they were really the first airline that didn't have a hub, and so they didn't have a lot of overhead. So, but the irony is that they haven't been the most affordable for over a decade. But for the most part, people say Southwest Airlines. Fried chicken, who am I talking about? Okay, Stephanie, actually, I didn't say delicious, even though you're correct, right? The idea is that our brain is primed. So what I'm doing to everyone here is I'm priming your brain, right? All I'm doing is I'm giving you an idea and then seeing what your brain does with it. So what happens is information comes into the amygdala of the brain. And when it comes into the amygdala, and I'm going to talk about this in a little more detail so we can use it to our advantage. It's going to go in the amygdala of the brain, and it goes right back into the limbic system. The limbic system is responsible for our memories, responsible for our life experiences, and all these things that are essentially very, very challenging for us to change. And so we have visceral recall associated with these organizations. Now, these are big, humongous organizations. And so, but the point of this is to show everyone the value of saying an idea and being able to generate information very, very quickly and very, very easily. If you're a nonprofit organization, your goal is fundamentally, from a communication perspective, is to be this. You want to be able to say an idea and have someone think of you. And it's not as easy as it really sounds. Most organizations will, they'll say, if you talk to them, well, when people think of X, I want them to think of quality. I want them to think of this thing we do. And be like, actually, you want the opposite. You want when someone thinks of an idea to think of your organization. That is really winning. And that is creating concrete inside someone's brain. And once you have it there, it's almost impossible for it to remove. Because our brain is so unbelievably lazy. It truly is. It's one of the most complex, perfect, and Katie's getting brownie points. My point is to understand, like, when there are certain things that are primed in your brain, you're sort of a victim of whatever sort of life experience has been put into your limbic system. And I want you to think about how it works as kind of like how a filing cabinet works. Now, I don't know, but a lot of times, if we're doing this presentation for a group of maybe young fundraisers and millennials, I have to say, A file cabinet is a big metal box, and you put paper in it. But obviously, a file cabinet works almost identical to how a database works. Very, very, very similar. And ironically, or coincidentally, almost identical to how our brain works as well. So what I want you to do is just sort of visualize for a moment. Imagine you're opening a filing cabinet, right? And you're trying to navigate the file cabinet. Maybe you're looking for something, or maybe you're just opening it. So you open the file cabinet. Where do your eyes immediately go specifically? Tabs. Eileen nailed it right off the bat. That's exactly right. Your eyes go to the tabs. Okay, so what types of information are written on tabs? Categories. Kim nailed it. That's exactly right. They're going to be specific types of categories. Okay, so client names, things like bills, months, employee names, and they all have one very specific thing in common, and that is they are objective. It's important for us to understand the difference between objectivity and subjectivity. The brain loves objectivity. The brain's always looking for something called an objective hook. An objective hook is the thing, and we do this when we're having a conversation with someone, by the way. So I'm sure all of you have been in maybe you're at a networking event or something, and you run into somebody and someone gives you this sort of maybe overly subjective, right? Obviously the difference between objectivity and subjectivity being objectivity, it's the same in everyone's head. Subjectivity being something totally different, i.e. a number is objective, and a description of something like an adjective is subjective. The brain does not like subjective information. The brain likes stories because it generates emotions, but if it lacks objectivity, it will not be memorable. So for instance, your brain will do this. Imagine you're at a networking event, like I said, and maybe you run into someone and they sort of are giving you an explanation of their pitch of what they do and where they work, and you're kind of like maybe not 100% following them. You will engage in objective conversation back to them, and you'll say something like, so you sell insurance to people that own boats, right? Of which point they would probably be like totally annoyed and be like, well, I guess if you want to say it like that. Like, well, what you were trying to do is you were trying to create an objective parameter around their conversation so that you know where to slot them inside of your brain, inside of the file cabinet. And without a tab, the brain doesn't know what to do with the information. So it just sort of throws it away and puts it in this big generic file. And if you are in the generic file in someone's head, you will not be remembered. You have a serious communication problem, not only if you're trying to develop business, right, or you're trying to solicit a donation, but organizationally at scale, you have a really big problem as well. So objectivity over subjectivity. I'm sorry, whatever your 12th grade expository writing teacher told you, when it comes to neuroscience, the brain does not like subjective information. So the more objective you can make your communication better. And Katie's going to go through some examples of how this works a little bit later. Question. How long do we all think it takes, right, for the brain to make a decision? And I'll send you a virtual candy bar if you get it right. It's like, I suppose a virtual candy bar today would be like a non-fungible token.
Yeah.
Sorry, I haven't spent my mortgage payment on an NFT of a candy bar, so I won't be sending that over. All right, who's closest here? Beverly goes with nanosecond, which is almost immeasurable, but she's pretty darn close. Jennifer says a millisecond. That's pretty close too. All right, according to Johns Hopkins, it takes approximately 200 milliseconds for a human being to make a decision. 200 milliseconds. You'd think we'd be a lot more of a thoughtful species than that. And the reason that we make a decision in 200 milliseconds is really very simple. Our brain, like I said earlier, is exceedingly lazy. And it really only has one job. And that job is to keep us alive. So when almost everything that the brain does has this sort of premise in the background. The reason that we make decisions so quickly is to assess threats. Even though we're living in this incredibly complex and digital world, the brain doesn't actually evolve all that quickly, right? So the part of the brain that makes the decision is the amygdala, and it sends it in the limbic system. The limbic system either sends it into the brainstem, which is fight or flight, or it sends it into the midbrain if it needs to like think about something or reflect or access our memory. And most of the time, it's sending it in. If it doesn't like what it is, or it sends it into something that's not in their worldview, it goes into the brainstem. And if it goes in the brainstem, that's the most developed part of your brain. It's also the most primitive. So when we make these decisions, we make them extremely quickly. So to say that we make a snap judgment is sort of the world's biggest understatement, and we do it with almost everything. Initial impressions cannot be underestimated. So I want everyone to take into consideration the fact that if 200 milliseconds is how long it takes someone to make a decision, and then the rest of the time they are either reinforcing that decision with their emotions or logic, or they are countering that decision with emotions and logic, the fact of the matter is the first level of concrete dries almost instantly based on basic communication and what those people already know and understand. So for instance, if I was to go through and run this whole operation we did earlier and get your assessments, and I did it 5 years from now, there's a very low probability that those things are going to change. It takes a ton. Okay, it's 7 messages per person recognized in order to take action. Actually, there's studies that have been done that are almost 150 years old, right, around how many impressions it takes. And what's interesting is, especially when it comes to something new, the brain goes through a very similar model that it does with trauma, right, in dealing with the stages of trauma that it does when it goes through messages. If you're talking about attribution analysis, Nancy, for instance, you could say that the 7 messages, that could be an average. There are a lot of different spaces where analysis like that can be done, but so I'm not going to argue with 7 messages because I don't know where you got that, because I've seen lots of different studies that have said 100 101, 104 down to like 5. So there's a lot of variables that impact that. But regardless of how many messages it takes, understand that the initial reaction to whatever you say is based on the belief system that already exists inside someone's head. And regardless of what that is, which is mostly an uncontrollable variable, you are going to be countering and dealing with that initial impression. You absolutely cannot help it. So we also need to understand this dude who looks exactly like a neuroscientist. Antonio Damasio was very, very lucky. I say lucky, very talented, but he got very fortunate. He was working with some folks that had a specific part of their limbic system disabled. The pituitary glands were not able to generate electrical activity, which is what makes our emotions. It's what excretes norepinephrine and dopamine and serotonin and stuff into our brain, which is what makes us happy or sad or look forward to the future or generate these emotions. And what he found was that these people that weren't able to excrete emotions were almost completely incapable of making a decision, even a basic decision like what to order to eat. And so he started studying. It was about 20 years ago. He started studying and saying, well, wait a minute. If these people can't excrete emotions and they can't make decisions, maybe we don't use, sort of the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere of our brain together when we make decisions. And so it turns out that he was absolutely right about that. So I want you to think about this. When it comes to decision making and how the brain works and how it operates, the logic brain, which is actually up here, it's the frontal lobe and the prefrontal cortex of the brain, does not physiologically participate in decision making, which means if you are trying to extract dollars from a donor or convince someone to sponsor an event and you make a logical argument with them, what you are doing is you are forcing them against their will to access a part of the brain that doesn't want to make a decision, and you are slowing them down. And the reason we know we're slowing them down is because of a book written by a gentleman named Daniel Kahneman, who's a behavioral economist, a Nobel Prize winner actually, and he was able to determine that. Put Thinking Fast and Slow in there. I think Katie's doing that right now. It's a great book to read and understanding how the brain makes decisions. And regardless of your role, it's absolutely critical to understand how this works. Most of the time in a development capacity or sales capacity, regardless of what it is you're doing, if you're talking to a donor, if you're talking to a corporate sponsor or a potential corporate sponsor or something like that, we talk to the wrong part of the brain. So by the way, everyone memorize this. There's gonna be a test later. I'm just kidding. Right? But the two things we need to make sure we understand for the most part is the amygdala and the frontal lobe. And I referenced both of those earlier for a reason. The amygdala is where all the information inputs into our brain, and it kind of sends it out to where it needs to, sends it to the parts of the brain that it needs to based on the perception of what we just heard. The frontal lobe is the complex part of the brain. And what we do most of the time is we talk to the frontal lobe of the brain. We talk to the smart brain. We talk to the logic brain. We'd say, this is a logical argument. You should do this. This makes a lot of sense. Here are the numbers, which can be good and bad depending on the emotional connection to those numbers. And what we really need to be doing is we really need to be talking to the amygdala, which is the dumb, basic, simplistic part of the brain. So a major takeaway here, which we'll address here at the end, is if we're not having a simplistic conversation with someone, if we're using big fancy words, one of the things I've noticed working in the nonprofit sector is you guys love to make up words. Oh my God, I've never seen a sector make up as many words as y'all make up. And we do it out of kindness, right? We do it out of respect typically. But when we do that, a lot of times we are confusing the amygdala of the brain. And when we do that, we're losing money. So lowest common denominator language is typically the most effective. Don't get flowery. Don't get fancy. Be simple when we are communicating. Also, the amygdala absolutely hates lists. It despises lists. It despises features. It doesn't like features. It likes stories. So if you are giving people a list of reasons, first of all, the average human who has middle of the bell curve from an IQ perspective, intellectual quotient just means that's your ability to recall certain number of things in order. 3 out of 10. So even if you give them a list of 10 things, they're only going to remember 3 anyway. So figure out a way to tell them that in the story. Again, Casey's going to show you some examples of this a little bit later. So in summary, these are the things that we need to make sure that we are doing. Follow the rules of how the brain works. Be objective. If you're using flowery subjective language, it starts building and sitting in the ether. And if you do not give someone an objective hook to tie that information to, it will just go away and they will forget it. Be singular. The more simplistic, the better. If you use a feature set or if you use a list of value propositions, you are going against how the brain naturally wants to operate. Think of the brain like water. Water will always find the path of least resistance in order to get to a solution. The brain is the exact same way, so don't make it work. The less you have to make their brain work, the absolute better you'll be. Use your emotions. If you are appealing to I know this is a thing, but it's very tough to stick to this. If you are not making an emotional appeal, you are absolutely failing. This is one thing that the nonprofit sector does better than anyone else, in my opinion. If we're working with somebody in the for-profit sector that's a manufacturer, they don't realize you can have an emotional conversation with someone even though you're talking about manufacturing. You guys already do an exceptional job of this, but avoid logical arguments. If you use logical arguments, you are going to be losing money. And simple. If they have to connect the dots, then just think about that as like, well, I got to have one more meeting. If you force them to connect the dot, you just created more work for yourself and decreased your timeline or increased your timeline, decreased the path that you took to kind of get to money. So hopefully all of this makes sense. Katie's going to talk about just a couple of very simple messages that she gets in appeals, and she beats them up. It's hilarious to see her in the office. So she's going to talk through a few of those, and then I'll start with a with kind of a case study here. So if anybody has any questions for the nerd portion of this, put them in chat or get a hold of me however you need.
Okay, good morning, everyone. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about some message differentiation and how this can work within some of the confines of how our nonprofits operate. So something that we get asked a lot of times, and something that we do when we're working with our clients, is a question we constantly get is, what is the difference between a donor and what is the difference between a volunteer in how they would invest financially? It is so interesting to see that, again, within people who are going to be working with our nonprofits, we have to segment those messages out, because what resonates with me doesn't resonate with Grant, and vice versa. So there are ways that we can break out some of these groups into larger chunks where we can then put those messages, kind of distill those down, and then put those into different segments and create different messages. It doesn't have to be 25 different messages. It can just be something as simple as donors and volunteers. So this, So this was an organization we worked with here. They are a youth development organization. They work with financial readiness for students. And their question was, they had a very strong donor database, but they could not get their volunteers to donate. And we tried everything. I will tell you, it was, we did the whole donate your cup of coffee and all of some of the best practices that are out in the field today. We tried to convert volunteers to donors. But it was even more fundamental than that. So what it came down to in this organization is volunteers and donors had a completely different mindset about what they were giving to within the organization. So with this organization, the best way that we distilled it down as far as the messaging was, do you believe in teaching someone to cook, or do you believe in giving someone a meal? Two totally different ways of looking at breaking the cycle of poverty. So what we found, though, is that donors believed in feeding the hungry. And a lot of the messages that were going out to the donor database, to the volunteers, there was no bifurcation of the message. And so what was happening is everyone was getting the same message. And it was, give the child the opportunity to participate in this program, or feed the hungry, if you will. Volunteers were looking at it from a completely different angle. So when you were saying feed the hungry, volunteers, it wasn't resonating. They wanted to teach someone how to cook. They wanted to teach someone how to create that sustainability and to rise out of a poverty situation. So they wanted to break the cycle, if you will, and we were totally missing that message. So what we were able to do then was to go to this organization and say, we need to split your database in two. It needs to be donors, and then it needs to be volunteers. Volunteers need to talk about breaking the cycle, teaching people to fish, teaching people to cook, if you will. And then with your donors, you need to talk to them solely about feeding the hungry and giving them the opportunity to sponsor a child in this organization's youth development program. So what that really looked like at the end was donors want to give a fish, volunteers want to teach to fish. And as long as you can come up with creative and emotive ways to share that with people, then you can create that segmentation. So what we found actually when we did this is they converted, I believe it was 30 to 40% of their volunteers to donors within their first campaign by talking to what the volunteers want to do, by talking about teaching people to fish and telling those emotive stories. They were able to convert that much of their database. So what I did is I am protecting the guilty here. And what I did for our next is we're going to talk about some real world examples. So, we just had our end of year campaigns. And so I brought in a stack of end of year appeals. And so I have pulled sentences and ideas from actual end of year appeals. And I'm going to talk to you about how, there's a couple that are really good. And I'm going to also talk to you about how just a couple of tweaks from these examples could make a big difference in some of the returns just by changing a few words or thoughts. Because again, we want to make sure that these things, that when we are talking to our donors, we are talking emotionally, but we are also talking objectively. So this is a veteran service organization. And one of the lines, I believe it was the second or third line down, is we're committed to helping injured veterans achieve their highest ambitions. And your support makes that possible. What is someone's highest ambition? So instead of saying we're committed to helping injured veterans achieve their highest ambition, we need to say we're committed to helping injured veterans go back to school. We are committed to helping injured veterans achieve financial sustainability. We need to talk further down. Highest ambitions to me and to Grant could be totally different things. My ambitions are different. His ambitions are different. Our look at the word ambitions are different. I love that your support makes that possible. That's a great follow-up, but you've left me wondering what someone's highest ambition is, and therefore it's not specific. Yes, Stephanie, you're right. You need to be much more specific. You need to 100% hone in on a specific program. You might do 25 different things, but you need to pick one and talk to somebody about that one. If you start, again, achieving lists, or if you start listing off things, or if you start using some of this flowery language, it becomes ambiguous. I don't know what that means. So I'm going to say, nah, it's easy for me to shut that down, if you will, or to be ambiguous and not make a decision. So next, this is an animal shelter. And this animal shelter says, we are one of the best shelters in the country, but we are still a shelter. What does that mean? We're one of the best shelters according to who? According to you? What makes you the best? Is it a list? So if you are going to talk about an award you won or something like that, you need to quantify it. You need to say, according to, ASPCA International, we are a top shelter for 2022 because of our whatever. That's when you need to start looking at some of the more subjective, and you need to have the sad puppy and kitty photo. And then if you're the best, tell me why you're the best. This means nothing to me. And so, everyone can say I'm the best. I'm the most beautiful. We do the most good. Well, what does that mean? So again, we need to be able to quantify, even when we're bragging on ourselves, we need to be very specific about who said we were the best, what does that mean and why, or completely omit it. And, many times when organizations aren't sure why people are donating to them, it leads to ambiguous appeals. So it leads to using some of these words that, because we don't know, we think that they give to us because we are the best, or because they've looked at us as the best. Well, that's not why people are giving to us. And so it's easy to just put in some kind of filler words if we don't know why people are truly giving to us. So this was the first line that was in an addiction appeal that came to me. So it's an addiction treatment facility, and it said, "Dear Katie, there are 8.3 million children in the United States living with an addicted parent." Okay, wow. You just spoke directly to my logic brain. So I'm going to go 8.3 million children in the US living with an addicted brain, or living with an addicted parent. Wow. You've also immediately made me think, what am I going to do? If there's 8.3 million kids, what's my $10, $100, $1,000 going to do when you overwhelm me with looking at a problem that is completely large like that? What I would suggest for this group is you would start off and say, "Dear Katie, meet Joanna. Joanna lives in Kansas City and has a parent that's addicted to alcohol." Okay, great. I now have Joanna. I can give to Joanna. I can give to a person. I can qualify that. We give to people. People give to you because you are in development and they like you. People give to other people in their organization, or give to other people that they are helping. Even if I know in my brain, I know that my donation isn't going specifically to Joanna. It feels like it is because I can qualify how I'm actually helping Joanna. 8.3 million, you've already lost me because I'm immediately going, there is not anything that I can do to make a difference in this problem, and it's slowing it down. So we have to start with those emotional hooks. We need to do an emotional hook, and then you can justify my decision with numbers. I'm not saying don't use numbers. We know people like numbers. There is subjectivity to numbers, but talk emotionally to me first and then justify my good decision and talk to my logic brain after I've made the emotional decision, because now you are just fortifying that I made the right decision because I'm helping so many other kids like Joanna. Next. Okay, so here was a great one. So it started out, it said, Dear Katie, personalization is great. First of all, if the days of dear friend are over, I'm going to tell you right now, if you say dear friend to your donors, it's going in the trash. Amazon knows me, Netflix knows me, you who I'm giving money to freely should know me. So I'm going to just right here, I think Grant and everyone laughs here. Like the minute I open something and it's like, dear friend, I'm like, trash. I don't even read the rest of it. Goes to file 13. So know your donor's name. Anyways, it started out, it said, Dear Katie. Then it started telling me about Robert, blah, blah, blah. The next sentence then, so it told the story. And then in the next sentence, it says, Katie, you can help level the playing field for neighbors like Robert. Now, what does leveling the playing field mean? I did not have enough room, but they told me what it meant. It was by providing mental health services for Robert, who has, a mental health issue. So it immediately told me that I could help people like Robert in my neighborhood, and how I could do it with mental health services. Also, just interesting fact, we've done a couple of studies on this. When you're talking to males and females, obviously male and female brains work differently, and I will leave it at that right now. So what we need, men want to hear things about their neighborhood. You need to bring it as close to possible. If you are going to bifurcate your database, male and female, women want to help community. We think a little bit bigger. We think a little bit more in larger groups. Men think about my neighbor, who is the closest person to me. So just a little fun, side fact. But anyway, so this trauma and food service was great. They immediately told me about Robert. Then they used my name again. Using my name is great. Any other information that you can put in there. So if you can put subjective information, what they did further in this appeal is they went down and said, we know you gave into 2020, your gift of $25 helped do this for people like Robert. Will you give $35 in 2022 or 2021? And it was like, oh, you made the decision for me. You're asking for $35 to do it. Done. I didn't even have to think about it. This was one I was very excited about. So this is an example of a good one. Okay, so that's kind of our larger presentation. We'd love to chat a little bit more. LaShonda, I heard you say personalization is what's up for me. You need to personalize as much as possible. So something that we're seeing more and more, and I just want to make sure that we are hitting on, don't just personalize my name, personalize how I have helped you. Anything you can do. If you know that I've given to you for 5 years, drop that in. If you know that my cumulative gift has been a certain number, drop that in. If you're celebrating volunteer hours, the more that you can tell me that you know me, the better I feel. And then there's something called the endowment effect. So the more that I make decisions to support you, the harder it's going to be for me to not support you anymore, because it's going to create cognitive dissonance. It's going to make me go, I have always supported XYZ food bank. I have, and you create this narrative where you are celebrating me and letting me know that you know me, the harder it's going to be for me not to give to you 1 year. Because why? What did you do? All of a sudden, I don't believe in your mission anymore? No, that's not true. So I would be creating cognitive dissonance with myself, and it becomes harder and harder with each interaction we have for me to pull back from you. So continue to celebrate those and to drop those in as much as you can in your appeals. To let people know that you know that. And that can be, mail merge. I mean, it doesn't have to be that you drop in every detail about me, like, Katie, I know you have a dog named whatever, but some of these larger things that you should have in your database, to be quite honest with you, can be merged in and make huge differences.
And I know LaShonda wanted to join us on stage, but she's on a mobile device. So unfortunately, this platform doesn't allow that. So guys, if you want to ask your question on stage in future webinars, make sure you use a laptop or a PC. Is Laura able to join us on stage to ask her question, or Leslie? Kaylee's handling our invitations, so.
Can you hear me, Katie?
I can, yeah.
Okay, I am checking on Laura right now. It's not giving me an option to let her on stage either for some reason, although it doesn't say mobile device.
Okay, let's go ahead and just roll through the questions. We'll read them for you, but Laura had a great question. She said, is giving dollar choices making more work or less work for the brain? And I think you kind of covered that, but maybe reiterate it a little bit.
Do you want to? So making dollar choices.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the best way as far as donors go. I'm going to drop another book in here, everyone, that I think you should read. It's called Change for Good, and it's by Bernard Ross. So he takes a lot of Daniel Kahneman and some of these other big thinkers and puts them into nonprofit terms, which I, of course, love, because while I did read Thinking Fast and Slow, it was a little bit of a snooze fest, and I wanted to hear about how to put it into the nonprofit sector. So when you're thinking about a great example of this is when you're talking about dollar amounts. We just talked about lists. Don't give more than 3. Do not give people more than $3 amounts. And then also what you want to do is you want to draw something around the dollar amount that you're hoping becomes your average dollar amount. So let's say you are looking at a monthly gift campaign and you say $10 a month, $35 a month, and $50 a month is going to be in your appeal. So you've got 3. You want to put a little box around $35 a month and say most common, or just change the color, just put the box around it, put what you want in the middle, because most people are going to look for social cues, and you've just given me social cues right there. That's like, oh, okay, $35. Most people are doing that. Done. I want to be seen in a socially good light. I don't really want to do less than what other people are doing. I might decide to do more, but I at least want to be in the average. So when you are looking at dollar amounts, there's some psychology to that, but ask for specific dollar amounts. Actually, what's been shown to work too is like weird numbers, like 35, 45, like 37.50. Okay, that's random, but it seems more plausible that that's what it would cost to do a service than $40 or $50. So when you're thinking about that, try to make it personal to you and try to only give those 3 options, but then do something to highlight what you want what you really want, what you're really asking for. Did that help?
That's a perfect answer. And can I suggest everybody check out Ronald McDonald House National? I know there's chapters all over the country, but check out the national organization's donation page, because I think they just followed what Katie says to a T. They call out an amount. They talk about the impact specifically of that amount. So maybe Kaylee can throw that link in the chat, but that's a good one to look at. Let's see here. So Leslie's asking, how does this change for funders, like foundations, private, corporate, community foundations?
How does it change for foundations? In what way? I'm going to turn this over to Grant to answer this one.
I'm guessing anything we've talked about. Should we change our messaging when talking to foundations?
Sorry, say that again.
Do any of these rules for messaging, do they change when we're addressing grant-making foundations?
These rules are immutable, right? It's not as though, because it's how the brain works, right? So if we're dealing with we deal with organizations of all sizes and scopes, really big, really small. how the brain operates when it comes to processing information is something that you don't have control over, right? It just happens. So the rules essentially are immutable. Now, what changes is understanding the narrative that exists. So, is what's important to groups of people is the challenging piece, right? So, and an answer earlier, which again, how do we create personalization when we have a small staff? Well, through your database, same thing. If you can understand what's important to specific segments you're making appeals to, Katie used the example of volunteers versus donors. If you can understand those, use the same rules no matter what, but the narrative and the things that are important to those particular segments are going to change. Measuring those, understanding those are a little more challenging, and that's what our company is set up to do and understand those things.
Grant, I usually feel like I'm like, okay, smart, but like you use words like immutable and identic, and I didn't even know that was a word.
Oh, sorry. Immutable just means they do not change, right? It's the exact same rules, right? They will not change regardless of the situation. It's because it's how the brain naturally sort of operates. I did want to, Marie, I'd sort of address something here. The idea that simplicity and no list seems contradictory. Well, so I think that what you have to be careful of is do not make the assumption that the reasons that you believe that people are the benefits of membership are what they believe are beneficial. So let's say that you have a list of 5 benefits. Well, are those equivocal? Are those the same in their head? Is one more valuable than the other? What if there's only one of those that care, or that actually matters to someone? There are times where we'll go through and we'll measure the value props or benefits for an organization and find out and be like, these 2 things you've been saying for decades, no one cares. Like every time you say them, you're literally lowering the value in someone's mind of your organization. Like you're literally losing money every time you say this thing because people just do not care. Well, it may be very important to your organization, the culture and the drive and why you show up to work and why you're embedded in the mission. But if the donor doesn't care, don't say it. So don't make the assumption that those 2 things are the same, because just because you're like, well, no, we have to have this list. One of those things, like here's the best case scenario: the brain averages value; it can't help it. So if you say this thing, imagine it's like this rolling like line, right? So you start, or like a number, I say like the number above somebody's head, and you say something, and the number is like a 70, and it's like, whoa, okay, good. They really like that idea. And then the next thing you say was a 30, it's going to average that. Okay, so the brain's going to come into a 30, it's going to be a 35. So you just substantially diminish the emotional resonance that someone has towards your organization. So don't make the assumption that just because it happens to be a benefit, a perceived benefit that you just have to have on the list, that it's actually valued to someone, because we find all the time that there is so much waste in those lists.
So should we be doing more surveying, more donor discussions? I mean, how do we search this out so we're reflecting the right benefits?
Well, first thing we have to do is we have to approach, everyone should be approaching the conversations and the messaging that you're having with an organization with an open mind. I'll tell you what, we this is all we do all day long. And even we sometimes are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. And a lot of times we have conversations with folks. Now, when you have an interpersonal conversation with someone, because information travels in the amygdala and in the limbic system is where your social systems are stored. So that means that people are going to be nice to you. If they like you, they're going to be nice to you, and they may not tell you the honest truth. 1, because they may not really know the honest truth because you didn't ask them a good question, or 2, they're going to tell you something that that they believe you want to hear because they like you, or they're going to reiterate something that you've already said because you primed them, which is very, very dangerous to do in interpersonal conversations. So it can be good as long as you understand the right types of questions to ask, and you can uncover good insights on what is important to people. We use a surveying system that we created that measures how the brain works, and so we can get a numerical understanding of how valuable things are to people, so that we know what to say and what not to say. But the more communication, the more that you have with your existing donors and potential donors, the better if you're going to be long term.
So Marie had a question. I want to make sure we don't skip over it. She's asking about text to give campaigns and if the logic is any different with that type of mechanism.
No, even more so, right? Actually, texting. Why is texting so popular? Because it's how the brain works. So simple. The brain. Like, how many times does someone get a long email and you're like, I'm out. I'm not even gonna read it. You might star it, but it's like that's such a commitment, even if it's just a few paragraphs. And some people, depending on where they are in the bell curve, and when it comes to patience and things like that, will impact how probable you are to read a long appeal or a long communication. But text messaging is an awesome way that you can communicate a very powerful, simplistic statement in a way that is going to get somebody to make your action. The thing that should give you a little bit pause is, what if you say the wrong thing? Right? What if I mean, it kind of forces you to go, okay, I got one chance. I gotta communicate this in a text message, which is an awesome exercise. Which thing should we say? Which thing is going to give us the strongest emotional appeal? And how do we do that in an ask format?
That makes so much sense. So if you have a question, we have a few minutes left. Go ahead and throw it into the chat. I want to make sure you guys get as much of Grant and Katie's wisdom as we can. Let's see, lots of comments on the texting. Let's see. Not seeing any more questions, but Grant, Katie, thank you so much. I will leave the chat open so people can read through it. And keep in mind, a recording plus any resources mentioned will be sent out in an email later today. Thank you all for joining us for Webinar Wednesday.
Thanks for hanging out, everybody.
Yeah, feel free to reach out to us.